The 13th chapter of the apocalyptic book of John the Revelator presents a graphic portrayal of two megalomaniac beasts, powers that rule at some time during the history of planet Earth, whose ability to influence and dictate extend to the furthest corners of the globe. It is revealed through biblical evidence that these powers receive their authority from the dragon, which according to the scriptures is Satan. It is further revealed through the symbolic language contained in this chapter that a cosmic battle of gigantic proportions between good and evil is finding its tangible fulfillment in the physical activities of human affairs, the visible symptoms of a massive spiritual controversy. The Bible describes a deliberate cooperation between the powers of the spiritual and physical realms, a cooperation between the highest levels of human operation and authorities of sinister spiritual dimensions that span almost the entire history of humanity. As hard as this may be for many to accept, there is little doubt that in order for such an all-encompassing effort to find its decreed fulfillment, a conspiracy of unimagined proportions needed to be conceived. Indeed, only as we embark on an in-depth exploration of history will we be able to reveal the specific identity of the powers, human and otherwise, that are hidden in the cryptic descriptions of prophetic symbolism. In light of these considerations and current events, what you are about to witness could very well be one of the most significant and timely exposés of recent times. Our journey begins in the context of a perfect society that existed eons ago. A society whose laws of coexistence were based on the perfect principles of love for their fellow beings and love for God who created them. In this perfect society, where God gave every being the freedom to choose whether they would remain loyal to Him and His government or not, Lucifer, an angel of supreme authority and power, began to question the fairness of the government of God and aspired to put himself in the place of God. The war that followed this rebellion against the laws of God, resulting in the expulsion of Lucifer from heaven, along with a third of the angels that chose to side with him, ultimately shifted the focus of the battle to the human inhabitants of a newly created planet called Earth. Lucifer's strategy of destruction and revenge was comprehensive and multifaceted in its dimensions. But at the core of his plan was the desire to usurp the worship that belonged to God alone and direct it toward himself. From the very first insinuations presented to Eve at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden, and consequently through succeeding ages, Lucifer has attempted to set up a counterfeit system of law and religious worship, very often in the process blending aspects of his own false system with characteristics of the true. This fallen angel, who now carried the dubious title of Satan, the Prince of Darkness, began to channel his ideas through human agents that not only communicated his deceptions, but became actively involved in establishing his cause in the real world. Direct links from present-day manifestations of his plan can be traced back to the post-antediluvian world and the Genesis account of the building of the Tower of Babel and the occult belief system that inspired its construction. Connected to this was the desire to establish a so-called perfect society based on satanically inspired ideals that would supposedly help man to escape the wrath of God should he ever decide to destroy the world again. Man's quest to control his own destiny and to worship a God that would give him freedom to define his own values and moral parameters was the central desire in his pursuit to bring all other humanity under his control and establish a new global order. Those throughout history who sought to implement this plan would stop at nothing, be it through deception or brute force, to realize their dream. A dream to rebuild the mythical city of Atlantis, described by Plato 2,500 years ago and believed by many to have existed in the antediluvian world. And along with this, to re-establish the principles that guided that society. The question will no doubt be asked: who, what, and if anything, is involved in the pursuit of this apparently far-fetched occult agenda today? If such a mystical concept as a perfect Atlantean society is in fact believed in and being implemented, then who are the players and what powers, human or otherwise, might these players have at their disposal? Indeed, can history, the Bible, and the unfolding of present-day events really confirm the veracity of such an agenda? There are those who believe that this is not only possible, but that there is overwhelming evidence to establish it as fact.
"400 years ago, Bacon, like many of his contemporaries, believed that Atlantis was America itself.
He was trying to lay a foundation for what could be accomplished in the New World. Bacon was the head of Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism.
He had a huge influence through being the chief of the Rosicrucian fraternity at the time. He had a huge influence on the birth of modern Freemasonry. And many of those Rosicrucians actually went into Freemasonry at that time to lift it up to its new level. And Freemasonry has a major influence on the founding of America.
The president talks about how we want to bring democracy to all these countries of the world. Well, why doesn't he want to bring a republic to these countries? We were a republic. We were never a democracy. It is only the people from the mystery religions and the secret societies who are pushing this idea of a world democracy, or this combination of enlightened nations, enlightened democracies to rule the world. As incredible as it may seem, there are really people who believe that. They're working full-time to accomplish that goal. And until you understand that they are the primary force behind the wars of this last century and World War III, which we are entering into today, unless they understand that the whole idea is to create this reestablishment of what they would believe is lost Atlantis.
When our founders declared a new order of the ages, they were acting on an ancient hope that is meant to be fulfilled.
Various evidences may undoubtedly point to America as being the nation to fulfill the Luciferian dream of a new Atlantis. But what sinister mechanisms have moved over centuries of time to push this nation in the direction of fulfilling this calling? It is not a simple task to discover all the players that make up the complicated web of secret societies and their connected organizations. Many researchers focus on one or two aspects, but hardly ever connect all the dots so as to bring one to a view of the power that controls and negotiates the course that all of its subservient bodies pursue. It is only as one goes back to the ancient revelations that God gave to his prophets that you can effectively begin to see the complete picture unfold. Many believe that the primary key to unlocking and understanding the prophetic code of Scripture is to be found in Daniel's record of King Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel chapter 2.
Daniel chapter 2 is quite an amazing prophecy. In fact, it is a prophecy that lasts 2,500 years. It begins with the head of gold, which represents Babylon. Then it follows to the silver arms and chest that represents Medo-Persia. And then from Medo-Persia, it extends down to the Grecian Empire, the bronze belly and thighs. And then finally, the legs are completely of iron, representing the Roman Empire. And then the feet represent the division of the Roman Empire into 10 parts in 476 AD. So in that prophecy, it consists the history from all the way from Babylon, all the way up to the very end of time. And then the prophecy ends when the rock strikes the image and destroys it, which represents the second coming of Christ.
In Daniel, we have a key to the book of Revelation. In fact, the two books, Daniel and Revelation, go hand in hand. The symbolism that we find in the book of Revelation is actually borrowed from the whole of the Bible, but the images are borrowed from the book of Daniel specifically. Jesus says in Matthew 24, when he was questioned about the signs of the end, that we should study the book of Daniel.
The belief is that when one discovers the keys to unlock the symbolic language of Bible prophecy and builds upon this vision, you are able to, far more effectively, interpret the subsequent prophecies found in Daniel 7, 8, 9, and onwards. Indeed, in light of these prophecies and the record of history and present events, Revelation chapter 13, with its description of two powerful beasts, practically becomes an open book. It is thus expedient, in order to accurately expose these baleful powers that have been attempting to manipulate the course of human history, to take a more comprehensive journey into the ancient writings of biblical prophecy.
We have to use biblical criteria in order to deal with biblical things. So I've put together a little dictionary here of prophetic terms where they are defined in the Bible, and we have to use the Bible definitions. A trumpet or a wind are symbols of war in the Bible. Water or sea in the Bible represents nations when it's in a prophetic sense. The waters you saw are peoples and nations and multitudes and kings. Revelation 17 verse 5. And a beast in the Bible, in a prophetic sense, is a kingdom. Daniel chapter 7 verse 17 says, and the beasts which you saw are kingdoms or kings. And a king stands for a kingdom. A horn in the Bible also represents a king or a kingdom. So out of a kingdom can arise a number of horns. That means the kingdom will disintegrate and many kingdoms will arise out of that kingdom.
Daniel chapter 7 is a classic example of how God many times teaches in His Word. He will say something once, and then He will enlarge upon it, the repeat enlarge principle as it's called in the Bible. And we see the exact same order as we find in Daniel 2. For example, the first beast of Daniel 7, which is the lion with eagle's wings, represents Babylon. And then as you go to the next beast, which would be the bear, with 3 ribs in its mouth raised up on one side, it would represent Medo-Persia. And then the third beast is the leopard with 4 wings, representing the swiftness and speed in which the Grecian Empire came to power under the auspices of Alexander the Great. And then the fourth world ruling empire we find is a beast that's hard to describe. It has 10 horns. It looks very hideous from what the Bible says in Daniel 7. But the interesting thing is that the teeth are made of iron, so it represents the Roman Empire. And then after that, we have another new facet of information that a little horn comes up on the fourth beast, which is Rome. It has Roman roots. It comes out of Rome, so it could not have come up per se in North America. It could not have come up in the Middle East, but it must be a Roman Empire. It must come up from Europe, and the roots are definitely Roman.
Out of the ruins of the Roman Empire, there gradually arose a new order of states whose central point was the papal see. Therefore, inevitably resulted a position not only new, but very different from the former. The Church and Churches, page 42 and 43. This is a Roman Catholic source, saying that here was a different situation. Historian Thomas Hobbes says, if a man consider the origin of the great ecclesiastical dominion, he will easily perceive that the papacy is none other than the ghost of the deceased Roman Empire sitting crowned upon the grave thereof. Okay, so Rome is not really gone. It's called the Roman Catholic Church. The Most Holy Councils, volume 13, Rome says, we define that the Holy Apostolic See and the Roman Pontiff holds the primacy over how much of the world? The whole world. That's interesting. The Vicar of the Incarnate Son of God, anointed High Priest and Supreme Temporal Ruler, the Pope sat in his tribunal impartially to judge between nation and nation, people and prince, sovereign and subject. Henry Condell Manning, temporal power of the Vicar of Jesus Christ. So did they say that they were in control of all the other kingdoms? Yes or no? Yes, they claim so themselves. So there are two biblical definitions of blasphemy. The one is if you say that you are God, and the other one is if you say that you can forgive sins. Well, what does the Rome say? Here's the Catholic Encyclopedia, volume 12, article on the Pope. It says, this judicial authority will even include the power to pardon sin. Now let's read papal statements, Ferraris Ecclesiastical Dictionary. The Pope is of so great dignity and so exalted that he is not a mere man, but as it were God and the Vicar of God. So there's a papal statement where the papacy claims to be God, just like the Roman Emperor claimed to be God. So he says it himself. Pope Leo said, we hold upon this earth the place of God Almighty.
And the bull Unum Sanctum put forth by Boniface the Eighth in 1303 says that he is equal with God. And in fact, he is God on earth. I quote it in my book. So the Pope, because he believes he's God on earth, he always dresses in white. And that's why every political visitor to the Pope always dresses in black.
How would the papal system be able to infiltrate all other bodies, religious and political, to realize her agenda of global control? In this case, one does not have to look too far to begin to expose the methods and mechanisms by which she would accomplish this task.
So we have this great Hegelian dialectic going on since 1536. When the Jesuit order was founded by Ignatius Loyola, when it was authorized by Pope Paul III in 1514, when it was brought into the papacy, and now we have this war of the Reformation and Reformed countries, including the Bible, which is the foundation for all Reformed countries, warring against the Counter-Reformation, Ignatius Loyola and his Council of Trent, and his hatred for the Bible and getting it out of the hands of the people. The Jesuits had really assumed universal political power by 1750. And the huge fortune that the order was amassing was then used to finance things like the 30 Years' War, to wipe out the Protestants of Europe. And so the Jesuits had this huge, tremendous financial power. They had revived Freemasonry in 1717, which was really the Knights Templars in 1717. Through the Scotland, because remember the Templars took up residence in Scotland, and so we have Scottish Rite Freemasonry being created, and the high rites, the first 25 degrees of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, were written in the College of Clermont in Paris, France, while the Jesuits were overseeing that, and the purpose for the Scottish Rite was to reintroduce the Stuarts back onto the throne of England, because the Stuarts had been expelled, they had been fighting, or they had been expelled in what, 1688, 1689. So the Jesuits revived Freemasonry for the purpose of expanding their temporal power. So by 1750, you have Masons in every court. You have the Jesuit confessors to all the kings.
Well, the origins were from the mind of a person by the name of Ignatius Loyola. Originally, it was intended as a counter-Reformation move. They wanted to destroy every aspect of the Reformation, the civilization and the culture that it spawned, the freedoms that were enjoyed by the Reformists, everything that was biblically based. They wanted to eradicate it and eventually papalize or Romanize everyone to come under the authority, ultimately, of the Vatican. The Jesuit oath of the fourth vow, which is the last vow that they take before they become commanders, like the leaders in that, they come right out and state exactly, how they infiltrate any religious group they want. They'll come in pretending to be a Pentecostal, pretending to be a Baptist, pretending to be, anything they want to, and ingratiating themselves into the various congregations, taking the leadership role, and then completely subverting it from the inside.
I now, in the presence of Almighty God and you, my ghostly Father, the Superior General of the Society of Jesus, founded by St. Ignatius Loyola, do by the womb of the Virgin and the matrix of God and the rod of Jesus Christ, declare and swear that His Holiness the Pope is Christ Viceroy Regent and is the true and only head of the Catholic or Universal Church throughout the earth. Therefore, to the utmost of my power, I shall and will defend this doctrine and His Holiness right and custom against all usurpers of the heretical or Protestant authority, and all adherents in regards that they be usurped and heretical, opposing the Sacred Mother, Church of Rome. I do further promise and declare that notwithstanding I am dispensed with to assume any religion heretical for the propagating of the Mother Church's interest, I do further promise and declare that I will have no opinion or will of my own, or any mental reservation whatsoever, even as a corpse, but will unhesitatingly obey each and every command that I may receive from my superiors in the militia of the Pope and of Jesus Christ. I furthermore promise and declare that I will wage relentless war, secretly or openly, against all heretics, Protestants, and liberals, to extirpate and exterminate them from the face of the whole earth, and that I will hang, burn, waste, boil, and flay, and strangle and bury alive these infamous heretics, rip up the stomachs of the wombs of their women, and crush their infant heads against the walls, in order to annihilate forever their execrable race.
There was no crime too great for them to commit, no deception too base for them to practice, no disguise too difficult for them to assume. Vowed to perpetual poverty and humility, it was their studied aim to secure wealth and power, to be devoted to the overthrow of Protestantism and the re-establishment of the papal supremacy. archbishop and bishop in the Catholic Church takes an oath of allegiance to the Pope, in which occur the following words: heretics, schismatics, and rebels to our said Lord, the Pope, or his aforesaid successors, I will to my utmost persecute and oppose.
The secret bodies that have arisen during and since the time Ignatius Loyola established the Society of Jesus, the Jesuit order, are many and complex. The secret societies such as the Freemasons, Illuminati Jacobins, the Rosicrucians, and the notorious Skull and Bones, numerous though they may be, it is the educated belief of many that these organizations are but the servants of the Jesuit order and thus naturally, knowingly or unknowingly, the vassals of Papal Rome. The connection between the secret societies and clubs has been well established by many leading researchers.
Now, Gary H. Carr, in his work En route to global occupation, puts it this way. He says there were the ancient mystery religions which come from Babylon, and they were pantheistic, of course, which means God is in nature, God is in everything, which in effect makes us God then too. This was inculcated in Kabbalism, was taken over in the Christian era in what is called Gnosticism, and the Knights Templars were the inner secret core that had the ancient knowledge of the mystics. This was carried further through Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry, and the Illuminati, which, according to Gary Carr, controls Marxism, American European secret societies and political societies, international banking, and the World Council of Churches. Now, the Templars, they had their secret inner information inculcated in the Rosicrucians and the Jesuits. The Jesuits, again, formed and created Freemasonry. And Freemasonry was created as the Protestant arm of the Roman Catholic Church. Unbeknown to them, beguiled, fooled, if you like, into doing the work that Rome wanted them to do, so that Rome could sit in the background while Freemasonry did it for them.
Louis XV said to Jesuit General Lorenzo Ricci, he said, please let the Jesuit order change some way. And Lorenzo Ricci said, let them be as they are, or else not be. So the Jesuits never changed. So what did they do? They went underground, and they started a series of networks. And one of those networks was the Bavarian Illuminati, because Bavaria was the strongest Jesuit stronghold north of the Alps, which throws light on who really started the Nazi war machine out of Bavaria. So the Jesuits start the Illuminati with Adam Weishaupt out of Bavaria, and they then import the French Revolution into France because the Jesuits were protected during their suppression by the Lutheran, or Frederick the Great, and by the Russian Catherine the Great. So the Jesuits are protected by a Russian monarch and by a German monarch, a Lutheran monarch, which Frederick should have never done. But you see, Frederick was the head of all Freemasonry on the continent. And so the Jesuits used Frederick then to write the last 8 degrees up to the 33rd degree. Frederick starts the Council of the 33rd degree, and then it was the work of Frederick and the Jesuits who ultimately they imported the French Revolution into France through the Grand Orient Lodge. Because now we have what's called Illuminized Freemasonry.
In this case, the saying, all roads lead to Rome, is most certainly applicable. Adam Weishaupt, founder of the Illuminati, and Voltaire, author of the Charter of Human Rights, and both motivators of the French Revolution, were Jesuit trained and included the essence of that institution's philosophy and methodology into their own organizations.
The Illuminati was created through Weishaupt, and of course is also the father of modern communism, who with his Jacobins conducted the French Revolution. Years later, Jesuit General Ledochowski with his Bolsheviks conducted the Russian Revolution in 1917, and it's identical to the other revolution. Let's have a look at Freemasons. The Grand Design Exposed says, the truth is the Jesuits of Rome have perfected Freemasonry to be their most magnificent and effective tool, accomplishing their purposes among Protestants. Now surely the members of Freemasonry themselves must be deceived, because if they saw it, they wouldn't do it, right? So actually, the order is being used, and they themselves are deceived. And only within the order, higher up, are those chosen ones who know, and they are controlled by the Jesuits for Rome. Very clever. Very clever. To make Protestantism do what you cannot do openly because you have been fingered by Protestantism as the Antichrist.
Based on these evidences, the religio-political claims of the papal system and the prophetic time frames given for her rule, many modern-day biblical scholars and researchers into secret subversive organizations have concluded that no other institution other than Rome can fit the prophetic profile. Added to these evidences is the testimony of the Protestant reformers, who clearly, through their own studies of Daniel and Revelation, saw Rome as the Antichrist power described in Bible prophecy. When studying the book of Revelation chapter 13 and applying the principles of interpreting prophetic symbolism, the full impact of what begins to unfold in Daniel and the direct connection it has to this very era starts to become frightfully clear. The first beast of this chapter, that contains elements of a leopard, a bear, and a lion, seem to indicate that John is seeing the primary elements of the vision of Daniel 7 in reverse. These powers have passed, and qualities of their systems, judicial, political, and religious, survive in the institutions that arise after them, most specifically in the kingdoms and nations that now fall under the authority of Papal Rome.
So this is a conglomerate beast having components, philosophies, if you like, of Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and Babylon. And it speaks with the mouth of a lion.
In Daniel 7, we have all of these beasts described in detail. And then when we come to the book of Revelation, verses 1 and 2, it describes an amalgamation of all the beasts in Daniel 7 put together. And the Bible student would recognize when they come to Revelation 13 that this is taken word for word from Daniel as far as the beast combining. And not only that, the description of the little horn power in Daniel 7 is the same description we find in Revelation 13. For example, one of those criteria is that it would receive worship, it would speak blasphemy and all sorts of different things, and those are all found in Revelation 13. In Daniel chapter 7 and in Revelation 13, we see the same time period emphasized. The 1,260 days. It's described 7 times in the Bible in many different ways. Time times half a time, 42 months. And we see this exact same time period mentioned in Revelation 13, which describes how long the papal supremacy would be in power, from 538, the decree of Justinian, to 1798, when the papacy was dissolved of its political power, when Berthier marched into Rome and took Pope the Pope captive. So we find all of those clues right there in both of the chapters, Daniel 7 and Revelation 13.
Labanca, professor of history at the University of Rome, says, to the succession of the Caesars came the succession of the pontiffs in Rome. Stanley's history says the popes filled the place of the vacant emperor at Rome, inheriting their power, prestige, titles from paganism. Constantine left all to the Bishop of Rome, which is not true, but nevertheless, the papacy is about but the ghost of the deceased Roman Empire sitting crowned upon its grave. So the legally recognized supremacy of the Pope began in 538 AD and then went into effect the emperor's decree, as I have said, where he was the corrector of heretics. So Rome today still claims to be the sole one who can determine what you should believe, because the papacy claims infallibility. He even has the title Pontifex Maximus, which belonged to the Roman emperor. So in effect, the Pope is the emperor of Rome today. I saw one of his heads, as it were, wounded to death. So there is a mortal wound. And his deadly wound was healed, and some in the world wondered after the beast. Oh no, it doesn't say that. It says, all the world wondered after the beast. Revelation 13:7 says, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. That's scary. Rome will control the entire world.
The same characteristics found in Daniel 7 once again serve to describe this beast of Revelation 13. The period of rule, this time denoted in months, is identical, and thus students of prophecy who use the historicist method of prophetic interpretation conclude that this is a description of the Catholic institution that now, according to greater revelation, receives a wound that later on is healed. When this wound was given in 1798, at the time of General Berthier's entrance into Rome, the captivity of the Pope and the abolishment of the papal government, most observers believed at that time that it signaled the end of Roman Catholic rule. But in 1929, Mussolini and Gaspari signed an historic pact that once again returned to papal Rome her sovereign nation status. The implications of these events and the prophetic revelations of chapter 13 are hard to avoid. Not only does papal Rome rule for the 1,260 42-month period, but its authority is once again revived, not only through the actions of Mussolini and Gaspari in 1929, but through the help of another beast, a power that arises out of the earth and causes the whole earth to follow Rome in her new revived form. Many believe that the identity of this second beast can only be applied to the United States of America, the new Atlantis of the mystics that would bring about the final realization of a new world order. Revelation chapter 13 verse 11 states, and I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and it had two horns like that of a lamb, and he spoke like a dragon.
Well, let's go to the early reformers. These people were magnificent. I have so much respect for these early reformers. John Wesley, in his notes on Revelation 13, written in 1754, says, the two-horned beast, he is not yet come, though he cannot be far off. For he is to appear at the end of the 42 months of the first beast. Now the reformers all clearly said, Rome is the Antichrist. They were watching it. And now they say, well, this other beast can't be far off. Let's have a look at the rise of the United States and see if it fits. The Declaration of Independence was in 1776. The independence was acknowledged by the nations of the world in 1783. In 1787, Constitution of the United States was framed. 1791, the Bill of Rights was added. And in 1798, the very year that Rome receives a mortal wound, France, the mightiest power in Europe at that time, recognizes the independence of the United States. So the same nation that gives the papacy a mortal wound, in the same year recognizes the United States.
America was founded as a Christian nation, but it was also founded as an occult nation. And there have always been two parallel forces here in America. One the Christian, one the occult, dating back into the 1600s. And until you understand that, you can't understand anything going on in the world today.
From the very beginning, those who were trying to establish the nation of America and formulate the laws that would govern her people were caught between two agendas. The one agenda had lamb-like qualities that sought to avoid repeating the oppressive history of a Europe ruled by papal religio-political authority. The other agenda, although it outwardly preached liberation, was striving to set up an occult-inspired order that would finally lead all nations back to Rome. In Rome, all the mystery religions, from ancient Babylon and Egypt to the various other pagan cultures whose spiritual roots went back to the Tower of Babel, found their fulfillment. In her and under her supervision, and only under these circumstances, would man be able to experience 1,000 years of peace, the fulfillment of the Aquarian dream and its new Atlantean society. Rome fought hard to destroy the lamb-like attributes of the American Constitution. Through her secret army, the Jesuits, and the various other sinister organizations she controlled, she infiltrated American society and government, and where necessary fomented discord, controversy, and division. President Abraham Lincoln said of her involvement in the Civil War,
"The Civil War would never have been possible without the sinister influence of the Jesuits. We owe it to popery that we now see our land reddened with the blood of our noblest sons. Through all their councils, theologians, and canon laws, their conscience orders them to burn my wife, strangle my children, and cut my throat when they find their opportunity. Sooner or later, the light of common sense will make it clear to everyone that no liberty of conscience can be granted to men who are sworn to obey a pope, who pretends to have the right to put to death those who differ from him in religion."
Rome held the American Constitution, its separation of church and state, and the privilege of people to enjoy freedom of religion in contempt.
Rome's reaction to the Constitution of the United States, of course, was not favorable because the whole papal system was built on the union of church and state. And for a country now to come into being, which was giving liberty and freedom to all, was certainly contrary to the principles of the papacy. And consequently, as a result, Rome has worked through the centuries to try to change that and to overthrow the Constitution of the United States and to once again bring into being that deadly wound is going to be healed, and when it is finally healed, it will once again be church and state united, and the church will use the political powers and the civil powers to enforce her religious dogmas.
Decade after decade, Rome silently infiltrated the highest echelons of American society, until finally the dragon-like qualities of America began to reveal its shadowy visage. Meanwhile, Rome had not forgotten her agenda to re-establish her authority in Europe. Using the same strategy she was employing in America, she set about infiltrating the religious and political powers on the continent. Her task was easier in that familiar environment and very quickly began to bear fruit. While she was actively involved in setting up a socialist regime in Russia, she just as ardently worked at establishing the occult, Jesuit-inspired system of Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany.
And according to the Jesuits, their own house organ, La Civiltà Cattolica, they say fascism is the form of government that comports most with the Roman Catholic Church. So fascism is internationalist, it's expansionist, it's dominated by monopolistic corporations that the Knights of Malta own, and it talks about God, quote unquote. Communism, on the other hand, is internationalist, it's expansionist, it's oppressive, it has concentration camps just like the fascists, except it denies the existence of God. The only difference is in its religious confession. Other than that, both systems are identical. And it goes back to the maxims that extremes meet. So fascism and communism are both run by the Jesuit order. Openly, the Jesuits back fascism. Secretly, they rule communism. And they control both leaders at the same time and coordinate their political moves to benefit the Jesuit order. The Jesuit Edmund Walsh says in his book, Total Empire, that the fall of the Russian Empire was the greatest single event apart from the fall of the Roman Empire in 476. That's how much the Jesuits wanted this. They said that if we do not succeed in this, it would be as though we lost the Reformation.
World War II was an opportunity that Rome could not afford to bypass. While she secretly supported Hitler, she was also actively involved in trying to establish herself in Croatia.
One-third of the Serbs we shall kill, another we shall deport, and the last we shall force to embrace the Roman Catholic religion and thus melt them into Croats. Corpses of children starved to death in the notorious concentration camp of Jasenovac, one of whose commandants had been ordained, a Franciscan monk, Father Filipovic. Ante Pavlovich, President of Croatia, during World War II, wanted by Yugoslavia for the killing of 700,000 Serbs and Jews during his 3.5 years as the Axis Viceroy. Until now, we have worked for the Catholic faith with the prayer book and with the cross. Now the time has come to work with rifle and revolver.
When asked if she could explain why the Catholic atrocities of the war were not as well known as those of the Nazi ones, she responded, "Nazi Germany is no more. The Catholic Church is still here with us, more powerful than ever, with her own press and the world press at her bidding. Anything published about the atrocities in the future will not be believed."
The course of war, regardless of the victor, was simply another stage in the process of fulfilling Rome's ultimate secret agenda. The world wars had long been part of the layered strategy formulated within the silent confines of Jesuit-controlled secret societies.
Albert Pike and Mazzini were used by the Jesuits then to design 3 world wars to restore the Pope's universal power in the earth. And some people deny the existence of that letter. And we have to remember that that letter was on display at the British Museum for many years until somehow, some way, it just disappeared. So indeed they did design 3 world wars, and those wars were calculated to do that in the end, make the Pope the universal monarch of the world.
The aftermath of war presented Rome's global henchmen with a golden opportunity to institute another mechanism that would take the world one step closer to a global New World Order. Spiritualists such as Theosophy's New Age prophetess Alice Bailey and world thought leaders such as Robert Muller, Teilhard de Chardin, Arthur Balfour and Hess had long predicted the coming of an age of global peace that would prepare the way for the coming of the New Age Christ. The establishment of the United Nations was immediately recognized as the tool for accomplishing this end. It was clear to those at the helm of the UN's mission what their ultimate purpose encompassed.
Now this is a very interesting man, Robert Muller. He's the former Assistant Secretary General to the United Nations, but he is today the mover in the spiritual field within the United Nations. He's also called the Prophet of Hope of the United Nations. He wrote, "We must move as quickly as possible to a one-world government, a one-world religion, under a one-world leader." The leading influence on their spiritual awakening was again Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. You remember who he was? Jesuit priest. See, they have Catholicism, the Jesuits, the top movers in the United Nations. Now, what did Robert Muller, the former Assistant Secretary General, have to say? He wrote, "Teilhard de Chardin had always viewed the United Nations as the progressive institutional embodiment of his philosophy." Teilhard wrote, "Although the form is not yet discernible, mankind tomorrow will awaken to a pan-organized world." And Robert Muller writes, "Any Teilhardian will recognize in this the spiritual transcendence which he announced so emphatically as the next step in our evolution. A general convergence of religions upon a universal Christ who satisfied them all." That's what Teilhard de Chardin said, Christianity and evolution. This is his quote. His quote. So a convergence of religion that satisfies them all. And he saw the United Nations as the embodiment of this philosophy. That seems to me the only possible conversion of the world and the only form in which a religion of the future can be conceived. Robert Muller writes in World Core Curriculum the following. Now this is stunning. "The underlying philosophy upon which the Robert Muller School," now what is the Robert Muller School? We'll have to come to that. Robert Muller School is the education program for the entire world as will be enforced by the United Nations. That's scary. Let's read on. "The underlying philosophy upon which the Robert Muller School is based will be found in the teachings set forth in the books of Alice A. Bailey." Hello? The books of Alice A. Bailey were published originally by Lucifer Publishing Company, which, because of all the flack, they changed to Lucis Trust. Isn't that correct? The school is now certified as a United Nations associated school providing education for international cooperation and peace. Alice A. Bailey claimed evidence of the growth of human intellect along the needed receptive lines for the preparation of the New Age can be seen in the planning of various nations and in the efforts of the United Nations to formulate a world plan. From the very start of this unfoldment, 3 occult factors have governed the development of all these plans. Within the United Nations is a germ and seed of a great international and meditating reflective group. A group of thinking and informed men and women in whose hands lies the destiny of humanity.
While the UN became the visible institution for accomplishing global political security through the creation of its global one-world government, Rome, on the other hand, enthusiastically put into motion her agenda to unify, through the ecumenical movement, the various Christian denominations and, finally, when the time was right, to lead them and ultimately all faiths back to Mother Rome.
And of course, behind the scenes, always, you have the papacy. And then the churches come together in Assisi in 1986. And at Assisi, all the religions of the world paid homage to the Pope. He became all things to all men: Islam, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism. In 1999, with the Dalai Lama by his side in Rome, 2,000 religious leaders paid homage to him. And they all agreed in condemning who? Christian fundamentalists who abuse speech and whose efforts at converting others incite hatred and violence. All present were in accord on 2 key points. John Paul II was endorsed by consensus as the planet's chief spiritual overseer, and religious fundamentalists who refuse to go along with the global ecumenical movement are to be silenced. They must be denounced as dangerous extremists full of hate. And then they come and bow down and pay their homage according to the inscription we just read. And the rock band is Italy's band. Music. 3 candles. Masonic ritual. At the Vatican Square. Dalai Lama. The Orthodox, the Muslims, the Eastern religions, sun worship, Zoroastrianism, all of them bowed down to him. Japanese Buddhism, Orthodox. When they do something, they do it well.
The second beast of Revelation 13, the USA, that rose up out of the earth, was rapidly losing its lamb-like qualities. A Protestant nation that had established itself on principles of religious freedom and justice for all was now reaching its hand across the Atlantic to grasp the hand of Rome. That which would have been unthinkable to America's founding fathers was now becoming a reality.
When Protestantism shall stretch her hand across the gulf to grasp the hand of the Roman power, our country shall repudiate every principle of its constitution as a Protestant and Republican government. Then we may know that the end is near.
When the United States rules the world, the Catholic Church will rule the world. Archbishop Quigley, 1903.
There's that book, Justin Fulton, that great author, right? Washington on the Lap of Rome. It was written about 1888. Washington on the Lap of Rome, written by this great preacher, Justin Fulton. And it shows how he calls it Rome on the Potomac, completely controlled by the Archbishop of Baltimore. There was a secret wire between Baltimore and the White House telling the president what to do, at least since the days of Grover Cleveland.
Ronald Reagan was the one who started off making a deal which started to contravene the Constitution of the United States. Harry Truman tried to do that in 1951. He got such a blast, even from the pulpit by his own minister, when he wanted to recognize the Vatican, that he dropped it. But Ronald Reagan, no problem, he just did it. One of the earliest goals as president, Reagan says, was to recognize the Vatican as a state and to make them an ally. That's contrary to the American Constitution. So by 1987, Pope John Paul visits the United States. President Reagan meets him and he says, "As you exhort us, we will listen." This is not separation of church and state. "For with all our hearts we yearn to make this good land better still." The Pope is quoted as saying, "I come as a friend of America and of all Americans, Catholics, Orthodox, Jews, all men of goodwill."
2,000 years ago, John recorded regarding the second beast of Revelation 13, "And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on earth in the sight of men, and he deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by the sword and did live." Protestant America, a nation whose founding fathers clearly understood the nature and danger of Rome and who ardently sought to prevent her from gaining ascendancy in North America, would ironically become the very power to finally lead the whole world back to Rome. One of the prime reasons for the existence of America, freedom from papal oppression, would now become that which she would seek to make null and void. Directors of the CIA, justices of the Supreme Court, military leaders and heads of state, now, whether they realized it or not, became the vassals and puppets of a diabolical system that sought only supremacy and freedom for herself alone.
2,400 of his faithful here to welcome him. He's waving to the crowd. Archbishop Regali is alongside the Pope as he shakes hands with the First Lady.
We honor you for helping to lead a revolution of values and spirit in Central Europe and the former Soviet Union, freeing millions to live by conscience, not coercion, and freeing all of us from the constant fear of nuclear war. Your Holiness, on behalf of all of us gathered here today, indeed on behalf of all the people of our beloved nation, we welcome you back to America.
The people of the United States have been a favored people, but when they restrict religious liberty, surrender Protestantism, and give countenance to popery, the measure of their guilt will be full. National apostasy will be registered in the books of heaven. The result of this apostasy will be national ruin.
The push toward instituting the Roman image in America was not just confined to political and judicial quarters. Religious leaders, knowingly or unknowingly, under the auspices of spiritual unity and in the cause of bringing the nation back to God, would begin pushing for religious legislation and a tighter unity between church and state. One of the major pleas is a call to legislate Sunday sacredness. Little do the churches of the Christian world realize that by legislating Sunday, they will be writing into law the very mark and seal of papal authority.
It's very fascinating what the Roman Catholic Church has to say today on this issue. Most Christians, it comes straight from them, not from me. I didn't make this up. Most Christians assume that Sunday is the biblically approved day of worship. The Roman Catholic Church protests that it transferred Christian worship from the biblical Sabbath, Saturday, to Sunday, and that to try to argue that the change was made in the Bible is both dishonest and a denial of Catholic authority. If Protestantism wants to base its teachings only on the Bible, it should worship on Saturday. It was upon this very point that the Reformation was condemned by the Council of Trent. Wow! Did you know that the whole Reformation failed at the Council of Trent because of the Sabbath issue? The Protestants claim to stand upon the written word only. They profess to hold the Scripture alone as the standard of faith. They justify their revolt by the plea that the Church has apostatized from the written word and follows tradition. Now, the Protestants claim that they stand upon the written word only is not true. The profession of holding Scripture alone as the standard of faith is false. Proof. The written word explicitly adjoins the observance of the seventh day as the Sabbath. They do not observe the seventh day, but reject it. That was his argument. If they truly hold to the Scriptures alone as their standard, they would be observing the seventh day, as enjoined by the Scriptures. Yet they not only reject the observance of the Sabbath enjoined in the written word, but they have adopted and do practice the observance of Sunday, which they have only tradition of the Church. Consequently, the claim of Scripture alone as the standard fails, and the doctrine of Scripture and tradition as essential is fully established, the Protestants themselves being judged.
Rome boasts about the fact that she has changed Sabbath into Sunday, and she even goes so far as to say that the fact that she's done that is a mark of her ecclesiastical authority in religious matters. She doesn't try to hide it. In fact, she boasts about the fact that she did it, and that is her mark of ecclesiastical authority. And when we think of that mark and realizing that the beast, which is a symbol referring to the papal system, is going to enforce that mark one day with laws where no man can buy or sell. And if that doesn't succeed, the time will come in Revelation 13:15 that they will even pass laws where God's people will be killed for being obedient to God and to His Word.
The very thing that became the point on which the papacy had cause to condemn the Protestant movement at the Council of Trent would now rise up as the ghost of history past to be the spiritual magnet to draw all the lost daughters of Rome back into her fold again. The Protestant movement, all its centuries of protest and effort to stay separate from a system which its very founders described as the Antichrist, would now cease to exist, as if it should never have been born in the first place. For all intents and purposes, it can truly be said of today's Christian world, Protestantism is dead.
Suddenly Protestantism collapsed. Weltbild shows the Pope shaking hands with Martin Luther, and it says from heretic to fellow traveler, from Ketzer zum Weggefährten. And in the biggest Protestant church in Berlin, they have again pictures and statues of Mary and candles and all of those things. Then the Synod of the Lutheran Church got together, heiße Eisen, alte Zöpfe, you know, the old battle between them. Der Papst soll nicht mehr Antichrist genannt werden. the Pope may no longer be called Antichrist. So, that's a big step from Martin Luther, would you agree? And then, I thought I was going to die. Germany calls to ask, forgive Luther. So now, this year, at the Congress in Italy, where the Pope resided, the new Pope, the Protestant Church, the Lutherans, a whole section of them said, we want to be part of the Mother Church again.
Indeed, according to Rome, there is only one true church.
The present Pope wrote this, the churches are no sisters of ours. You know these statements. It must always be clear that the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Universal Church is not the sister but the mother of all the churches. That was Cardinal Ratzinger, the present Pope Benedict.
Some have come to the conclusion that Rome has changed, that she has repented of her bloody megalomaniac past. But these evidences revealed in the very current acts and views of this system should send a clear signal to the world that Rome never changes. The warnings of Revelation chapter 13 should rekindle the fires of Bible-believing Protestantism in the hearts and minds of all who value freedom of religion and would rather choose to bear the mark of God's authority than to carry the mark of the Roman curse. In chapter 13, verses 16 to 17, these words are spoken with regard to the role and consequences of America bringing all nations back to Rome.
And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. The final identifying qualification of the Roman power is given in the closing verse of Revelation chapter 13. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666.
In homage to the papacy, the United States will not be alone. The influence of Rome in the countries that once acknowledged her dominion is still far from being destroyed. Romanism in the Old World and apostate Protestantism in the New will pursue a similar course towards those who honor the divine precepts. When Sunday observance shall be enforced by law, then whoever shall transgress the command of God to obey a precept, which has no higher authority than that of Rome, will thereby honor popery above God. They will thereby accept the sign of allegiance to Rome, the mark of the beast. A power from beneath is working to bring about the last great scenes in the drama. Satan coming as Christ and working with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in those who are binding themselves together in secret societies. Those who are yielding to the passion for confederation are working out the plans of the enemy. The cause will be followed by the effect. While many leaders are active agents of Satan, God also has his agents among the leading men of the nation. When the final warning shall be given, it will arrest the attention of these leading men through whom the Lord is now working, and some of them will accept it.
It is not without reason that God has given us the prophecies of Scripture. They are not a closed book that God has forbidden man to try to understand, The very third verse in the opening chapter of Revelation reads, "Blessed is he that reads, and they that hear the words of this prophecy, and keep those things which are written therein, for the time is at hand." It is truer now than when that statement was spoken by Christ to John 2,000 years ago. The history of this world, as presented in the prophetic image of Daniel chapter 2, reveals that we are living in the very tips of the toes of the kingdoms represented by iron and clay. The stone kingdom of Christ, birthed without human interference, is about to descend from the heavens to re-establish the glorious eternal government of God, to obliterate forever the powers of darkness and the works of iniquity. Which kingdom will you be subject to? Whose mark of authority will be inscribed in the recesses of your brain and manifest in the action of your hands? How long, asked Elijah all those thousands of years ago on Mount Carmel, in the presence of all of Israel, the prophets of Baal, and King Ahab? How long, he asked, halt ye between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him.